Die deutschen Gasspeicher sind für die Jahreszeit erstaunlich leer. Gerade jetzt, wo es so unfassbar kalt ist, ist das gar nicht so ideal und wir sollten dort nochmal genauer hinschauen. Wir haben ja in den letzten Wochen und Monaten immer wieder insbesondere das Thema Öl und Energierohstoffe hier auch auf dem Kanal gehabt. Ja, wir sind ja konträr, wir schauen also zu den Dingen, die viele andere Investoren gerade gar nicht haben wollen. Und gerade da hatten wir eine Grafik in den letzten Tagen zu, schaut tatsächlich auf der Welt keiner hin. Öl und Gas sind für viele langweilig geworden und das, obwohl gerade am Gasmarkt in den letzten Tagen wieder ordentlich Drive reingekommen ist. Heute habe ich euch ein Interview zum Sonntag mitgebracht und zwar mit Ian Chakos. Ian Chakos ist Vorstandsvorsitzender der Firma ADX Energy. Das ist ein börsennotiertes Unternehmen aus Australien. Ian ist also auch Australier, keine Sorge, wir haben Untertitel dabei, also für alle, die sagen, Englisch mag ich nicht so, könnt ihr das auf Deutsch mitlesen. Aber er ist auch im Vorstand eben von ADX Energy, die produzieren Öl und Gas in Österreich und sind auch als Explorer unterwegs, also schauen, dass sie ihre Reserven und ihre Produktion entsprechend vergrößern können in Österreich und Italien, also hier als europäischer Energielieferant für die Zukunft. Ganz wichtig, ich habe selber Aktienbestände der Firma ADX Energy. Ich habe dort also einen Interessenskonflikt. Gerade weil es ein so kleines Unternehmen ist, möchte ich das hier nochmal ganz, ganz klar betonen. Das ist keine Anlageempfehlung, also bitte nicht blind irgendetwas kaufen. Ja, das ist mir ganz wichtig. Und der zweite Interessenskonflikt ist auch, dass wir mit der ADX Energy auch einen Dienstleistungsvertrag haben. Das ist ja das, was ich immer sage. Das ist unsere Aufgabe, unsere Tätigkeit, unser Hauptjob bei der AXINO Capital, dass wir auch eben die Kommunikationsarbeit für solche Firmen machen. Und heute haben wir das für euch auf dem deutschsprachigen Kanal mit dabei, weil es geht um Europa und die ADX hat jetzt in den nächsten Wochen einiges an Explorationsarbeiten vor. Deshalb ist das Timing vielleicht für den einen oder anderen ganz interessant. Nochmal, bitte nicht blind investieren. Nochmals, die ADX Energy bezahlt auch dafür, dass wir unter anderem Interviews machen. Dass es jetzt hier auf dem deutschen Kanal erscheint, ist unsere freie Entscheidung. Ja, aber dennoch, das müsst ihr wissen, sollt ihr wissen, da sind wir ganz transparent. Jetzt wünsche ich euch viel Spaß mit einem aus meiner Sicht sehr, sehr interessanten Interview und dann sehen wir uns morgen hier am Montag zu den normalen Zeiten wieder. We have seen a very sharp increase in the gas price over the past few weeks and months, and we have had a little bit of a shaky year when it comes to oil in 2025. And we're going to talk about the energy markets, especially here in Europe, because today with us is Ian Chakos. He is the executive chairman of ADX Energy. It's an oil and gas producing company based in Australia, but operating also in Austria, which is in the center of Europe. And you're also going to have a large exploration program now in the beginning of 2026. So Ian, I'm really looking forward to our interview. First of all, thank you very much for your time and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you, Jan. Thank you for having me.
So Ian, let's start a little bit with the macro perspective, right? I already said we had a sharp increase in the gas price and we should talk a little bit about the, let's say, macro dynamics when it comes to oil and gas, especially here in Europe. We had a while ago the narrative that we don't need oil and gas anymore. We have the sun and we have the wind, but it seems like that's not going to play out as some people have expected. So we're moving back to oil and gas. And give us a little bit of an idea what's going on in the European markets especially.
Yeah, certainly. Well, I think right now what we've seen is, three influences on gas price. Obviously, colder weather, storage levels almost at record lows for this year. In Germany, you're at 43%. France is at 42%. Netherlands as low as 36%. Whereas traditionally this time of year, we're usually up over 65%. So that's a bit of an issue. Now, obviously, Europe is, since Russian gas has been cut back, still not cut back enough, but there's been about 45% reduction in Russian gas, and that's been made up largely by LNG. But what we actually are seeing now, there's also a cold winter in Asia, so there's competition for LNG. So in the short term, they're the influences, but in the longer term, we've got much stronger influences. From the fact that there's been quite big growth in the requirement for gas in Europe. For the first time, we've actually seen an increase in gas-fired power generation since the invasion of Ukraine. And also there was legislation brought through the EU in December for the phase out of Russian gas and also the phase out of Russian oil. And that's by the end of 2027. So there's obviously some short-term impacts. but also some long-term impacts which will affect where oil and gas prices go in the future.
That seems like a very good overview. What is your opinion as an oil and gas producer? Obviously, you cannot give a forward-looking statement when it comes to price discovery of oil and gas, but what kind of prices are you looking at long term? Maybe you can give us an idea so people also have an idea what you are looking at.
Yeah, I mean, I think, European gas price is going to be largely dependent on imports. Unfortunately, Europe imports 25% of its gas from Norway, and another 25% comes as LNG. So obviously those external influences, both political, are going to have a big impact. What we're also seeing that probably hasn't been understood is that, AI and these data centers are pushing gas prices up, certainly in the US, and then that affects LNG. And I think that's also a trend we're going to see in Europe. So demand actually in 2025 grew by 6.5% for gas. And now with further cutbacks of Russian gas, up to 20% of Russian gas to be cut back, and then up to 20% of LNG to be cut back, which is still coming in from Russia. So we see a tightening, an even bigger tightening for gas. Mm-hmm. The oil picture, I think, is a little bit different. Ever since COVID, we've seen, if you like, obviously the demand growth has been relatively strong, but also the capacity growth has been strong. Where we likely to see an inflection by the end of 2026, and I think most of your global analysts will say 2026 will probably stay pretty flat, depending on what OPEC says, probably somewhere between 60 to 65 US dollars a barrel for Brent. But then we see actually potential for demand outstripping, if you like, current growth, because there's been a huge underinvestment in oil, and as a result, as you said earlier, what we are seeing, while the International Energy Agency was thinking that oil and gas will be phased out, in fact it's quite different, and we're seeing demand growth for energy much bigger than people expected, and it's got to be coming from somewhere. And I think we're going to need all the energy we can get our hands on: oil, gas, renewables, nuclear, everything we can get.
Yeah. Sounds interesting, and everything we can get is something that the European countries are not aiming for at the moment. You mentioned it already. The gas storage is quite low for this point of the year, especially here in Germany, but also in our neighbor countries. Give us an idea, why is that? Do you have an opinion on that? And also, you as an European gas producing company and oil and gas producing company, do you think you can benefit on this in the short term?
Well, I think, first of all, we've been lucky that historically, we've still had, you've still been importing quite a bit of Russian gas. That's gone out of the market. And also, you've had relatively warm winters. So ever since Ukraine, we've had 2 relatively warm winters. Now, this year, the winters are much colder. And obviously, not only Europe, but also the UK and elsewhere are seeing much bigger demand for gas than was expected. So I think, everyone's trying to juggle what they do. I think obviously there's been strong predictions in terms of getting to net zero. No one seems to be achieving those predictions. And I think also, as I mentioned earlier, with AI and data centers, there's been a big increase in demand that people haven't really factored into their thinking. Yeah. And that's why we see oil and gas being very much needed, for at least till 2050. But look, I think it's good to remember that the EU still sees gas as a transition fuel up to 2050. So I don't think the EU, while obviously they've been trying to increase their renewables, they still recognise the importance of gas.
Very good. Thank you, Ian, for the macro overview. And let's talk a little bit more about ADX and your upcoming exploration work. Maybe before we do that, just a quick disclaimer. So we are fully transparent. I own stocks of the company. We in general own stocks of the company. And your company, ADX, and our AXINO are working together for the communication work in the German-speaking markets, right? Just so everybody is aware of that conflict of interest here. So let's talk about ADX. And you're planning to drill several gas wells in Austria, actually especially this year. Some of the projects are quite new and some are quite well known to the investors, like for example, Welchau. Maybe you can give us an idea, A, on the Welchau follow-up work, and B, on the especially 3 shallow gas projects like Hoch 1. What is going to be the main focus and what can we expect?
Yeah, look, I think first of all, we're fortunate that we've been able to get back into to continue testing at Welchau. So we expect that we'll be actually mobilising a rig to do that work during early February. So at Welchau, we'll be testing an upper zone that was not tested before. There are at least 2 zones out of 3 that have not been tested. So we'll be starting on the first zone in February. But Welchau is a long-term asset. It's basically we made a discovery of oil there, but also there was a historic discovery of gas. And what we're seeing at Welchau is a possible link between what we've discovered in Welchau and deeper gas that was discovered by OMV in the late 80s. So we've been doing a lot more work on Welchau as a prospect, and we'll have more to say on that in the next month or so. But in terms of the shallow oil potential, that's what we'll be going after in February. And what we hope to do is to be able to prove that there is shallow oil, if you like, resources that can be developed, as well as in the future, by deepening Welchau, deeper gas resources that can be developed. So, Welchau will take probably another year or 2 to completely understand. It's quite a complicated discovery, but obviously any new positive news will be very helpful towards taking Welchau towards something commercial.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now, in terms of shallow gas, we announced quite recently that we've completed our licensing for up to 3 wells. And I'd like to remind people that we're in Austria, and we've been able within 6 months to license 3 wells for drilling. Now, in many parts of Europe, that would be quite difficult to achieve, but in Austria, I guess the Austrian government is quite favourable again towards gas development. They realise that gas is very important, for the economic future and stability of Austria. So the first well we'll drill is a prospect called Hochfeld. It's about an 8 BCF mid-case prospect, but the upside is quite large. The upside is potentially double that. But in terms of what is a BCF worth in the ground, it's worth about 10 million euros. So each BCF has potentially quite a large value. And what makes these more valuable is they're low risk, they're relatively shallow, and they're also very close to infrastructure. So it means the development costs of these projects can be, relatively low, but the revenue can be quite substantial. So if we'll follow on then with Goldbrunn, that probably won't be immediately after Hochfeld. It'll probably be 2 or 3 months after Hochfeld, but we expect that we'll have a fairly continuous drilling program through 2026. And the good thing is we've got about 7 follow-up prospects. So this is a trend that was very successfully drilled 20 years ago by the previous operator, RAG. But with the combination of new 3D seismic and AI, we've been able to map out areas where this trend has not been drilled, and we see some very good potential there for us to significantly increase our cash flow going forward in Austria.
Perfect. That sounds interesting. And before we talk about the Italian projects, maybe just a quick question. When it comes to who is going to pay for that, do you have the money for the exploration work? Are you going to play with farm-ins like you did in the past? Give us an idea there, maybe.
Yeah, look, the first well, we've raised funds and already, and we're drilling that in combination with a MND, the Czech company. The next well, we're in farm-out discussions with a number of companies, and we anticipate by the time we get to drilling, we would look at obviously a farm-in. But we really like that prospect. We see a very high chance of success. So we'll also assess what our share price does, what we do with Hochschild, what we do with Welchow, and if we have, if you like, the right share price appreciation, we might even consider drilling one of those wells through our own equity.
Okay, very good. Very interesting. Thank you very much, Ian, on the Austrian side. Let's go a little bit further south, at least from a German perspective. Let's talk about Italy. You also have a very interesting gas project there in the Sicily Channel. What's up next there? Is it also on your top list of this year? Are you going to focus more on Austria? Give us an idea on this project.
Yeah, look, again, Italy is a great new asset for us. It's in an area that we're adjacent to a field offshore that's been developed by Eni in combination with a partner called Energiewende, and that's a new development that came into production in late 2024, and it's very similar. It's very analogous to what we have in our permit in the Sicily Channel. Now, in the Sicily Channel, much like Austria, we have the benefit of historic exploration. So historically, they only drilled for oil. When they found gas in the 80s, no one really cared. Now, obviously, the situation is very different. So there's been up to 10 wells drilled there. There's historic seismic. And what we've seen in some of those wells is, they actually discovered gas, but nobody cared. Now, with the seismic, we can actually see that there's quite a large resource potential that's available to us. But the nice thing is where Eni's development is in 700 meters of water, where we are in only 100 meters of water, and the drill depths are very shallow. So while ADX is a small company, we tend to focus onshore. This is one area where we're only 50 kilometers from shore. It's shallow drill depths again, and the economic potential of these prospective resources are very high. So right now we're looking at a most likely case of around 600 BCF of gas, which is a very substantial resource in the context of Europe, but the upside is quite large. What we're doing right now is we're actually purchasing additional seismic, which is available to us from Eni, the national oil company of Italy. We'll also be adding that additional seismic into our database, and we'll be coming up with a new resource assessment that we will probably have independently assessed within the next 2 or 3 months. So yes, I mean, we can't progress Italy fast enough. Italy is a country that's starved of gas. It imports 95% of its gas, so it's even worse off than Austria and Germany. And what's obviously changed in Italy is a very pro-development Meloni government that wants to see further hydrocarbon development to actually increase its own economic security.
Perfect. Ian, thank you very much for outlining all the upcoming activities, A in Austria, B in Italy. Let's maybe just step back for the last question and let's talk a little bit from an investor point of view, right? When you have if you have been an investor in ADX for quite a while now, you follow the share price and you saw, well, it has been going down like 12, 30 months ago. And if you're new, you look at the company, you listen to all that exciting things, and you maybe look also at the share price and you have a question mark. So maybe just from your point of view, because you're part of the management team, I cannot give an investment advice, so can you. But what do you think, maybe from your point of view, why would it be an interesting opportunity to watch at ADX stock as of right now? Is it a good timing because you have so many things ahead and it seems to be a quite low share price compared to where we've been a year ago?
Yeah, look, I think part of the problem for ADX is that we are an ASX listed company and we're listed in Australia, yet most of our activity, well, all our activities are in Europe. And typically, investors don't get too excited about companies unless they're actually doing something. So unfortunately, we got hurt very much by Welchow. We got hurt not only by the first test, which didn't go as we'd hoped, but then secondly by if you like the legal disruption to our activities, and that really hurt us. Now we're back where we're going to be testing Welchow, and we see quite a bit of interest in Welchow, but also we see the shallow gas. If the first well comes to fruition, it's a trend that we can follow, and where we see that as quite a transformational opportunity for ADX. So in addition to that, we are also looking at potentially looking at listing also in Europe to give, we'll have more to say about that, which will also give European investors the ability to invest directly in Europe, in a European assets in their own backyard. Yeah. So look, I think obviously oil prices come down a lot. It's not, and that hasn't helped us. But we've raised capital. We're now in a good position to get out and start drilling, and that's what people want to see.
Very good. Ian, thank you so much. Right, it's always hard to call the bottom of a stock or of a trend, but it seems like you have some very interesting trigger points for the company for being really a transformational year of 2026. I really appreciate the time, and it was great talking to you. Great overview on the oil and gas markets, also on ADX, and I wish you the best of luck for the upcoming exploration work. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Jan.
Perfect.